begrüße Sie ganz herzlich zur dritten und letzten Lesung im Rahmen der diesjährigen Vorlesungsreihe, den Adorno-Vorlesungen, ein guter Jahrgang 2024. Ich habe zwei organisatorische Vorbemerkungen. Der erste aus gegebenem Anlass. Prüfen Sie bitte nochmal Ihre Telefone, ob sie auch leise gestellt sind, nicht, dass sie plötzlich anfangen zu klingeln, noch schlimmer, dass sie anfangen in einem langsamen Crescendo immer lauter zu werden. Dafür sollten Sie sich kurz Zeit nehmen, bitte. Und dann der Hinweis, dass wir heute, wie es üblich ist im Rahmen der Adorno-Vorlesung an dem dritten Abend, bereits um 20 Uhr schließen. Nicht sharp, aber vielleicht auch kurz nach 20 Uhr. Das heißt, die Diskussionszeit wird entsprechend kürzer sein. Nicht, dass Sie nachher enttäuscht sind. Oder Sie können natürlich trotzdem enttäuscht sein, aber ich kündige das jetzt schon an. Welcome to the third and last of the 2024 Adorno lectures, and welcome for the third time and again to Loïc Wacquant, Professor of Sociology at the University of California at Berkeley. The second lecture given yesterday was, apart from many other things, about neoliberalism as the re-engineering of the state, about the penal state managing not crime but urban marginality, about the spatial dualization of penalization, and about the court as a locus of hidden or not so hidden class politics. This is what Loïc Wacquant will be taking up tonight with the third part of his lecture series on rethinking the penal state. The third part that has had changing titles over the last weeks and days and maybe up to the last minute. So I prefer not to tell you the title, but to leave it to Loïc to tell you what the final title is eventually. So thank you, and Loïc, it's yours.
Thanks to the Institut for Sozialforschung for the invitation to deliver these lectures, and thanks for the audience for showing up for a third evening. I hope I will not disappoint you on this third and final lecture, and which is entitled, it's true, the title has changed as I was writing the lecture. And it's the first time, this is the world premiere of the study of prosecutors and of the Court of California that I carried out for 3 years. So I want to thank the prosecutors and the defense attorneys and the judges who were patient with me and who taught me what little I know about the criminal court, its mores and its mysteries, and that I will share with you tonight. So let me remind you, for those who missed. So yeah, the final title is Penal Power in the Flesh: A Day in the Life of a County Prosecutor. And for those who missed the first two lectures, there's a little reminder that on the first evening I drew on social theory to construct a robust concept of the penal state. Last night I turned to social history to document that the prison as the fulcrum of the penal state was always oriented towards dispossessed and dishonored population. And then tonight I'm going to deploy ethnography to take you deep inside the bowels of the Criminal Court of California so that we can witness and we can analyze penal power in action. So penal power is not just a theoretical abstraction, necessary to think of the ways in which the state curates crime, contains socio-moral disorders, manages urban marginality, and draws the boundary of citizenship through the police, the courts, and the prison. Penal power is also an everyday reality, emanating from the routine workings of these institutions and shaped by the ordinary ways of thinking, feeling, and acting of the agents of flesh and blood operating within the coils of the bureaucracies of punishment. to understand the delivery of penalty as legitimate material and symbolic violence trained on bodies out of order, then it is essential to disclose the ordinary functioning of the criminal court as the throughput agency that transforms the input of the police into the output of the prison and its extensions. In this lecture, I will take you deep inside the Criminal Court of California and place you at the point of production of punishment. I will disclose the workings of negotiated justice, that is a justice system based on the extraction of guilty plea. In a plea bargain, the prosecutor offers to lower the charges and recommend a lenient sentence to the judge in exchange for a guilty plea by the defendant. The prosecutor gains efficiency and certainty of resolution, and the defendant gets a discount on punishment. In the United States, 97% of the serious criminal cases, called felony cases, are resolved by plea bargaining. The trial has long been dead. It survives only in television series and in the movies. So, to take us inside the criminal court, today's lecture effects a series of analytic displacement. I will draw on a 3-year ethnography of the day-to-day operations of 2 county courts in Northern California to flesh out the practical microstructure and carnal tenor of penalty by following a single attorney at work negotiating plea bargaining agreements. And this foray is based on a series of analytic displacement. It moves from the output to the throughput by triangulating the perspective of the prosecutor, the defense attorneys, and the judges. It also provides a grasp of penalty in the making, not from the open court, the room open to the public where the judgment will be, the trial will take place or the judgment will be pronounced, but where the action is largely ceremonial and bureaucratic. But it will take a view from the closed backstages of the judges' private chambers, the negotiation and the witness rooms, the corridors, and the offices where the complex and contentious court work of criminal lawmaking at ground level is carried out. And the conceptual canopy of the penal state that I developed in lectures 1 and 2 mandates 2 crucial moves intended to inject structure and history into the analysis of the occupational interactions and legal strategies in and around the courthouse. So, due to time constraint, I will leave aside the historical side and I will focus on structure. And the first move consists in locating prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges in the objective structure of relations of power comprising the local judicial field as a space of forces and a space of struggles. In addition, prosecutors and public defenders themselves must be situated in the social architecture of their respective offices, both of which are organized around the polar oppositions between what they call true believers and what I call negotiators. And these oppositions, which I will describe a little bit later, mirror the opposition between the 2 offices, as well as the duality between the right hand and the left hand of the state. So you remember, first lecture, I pointed out that the state is organized around the opposition between the left hand and the right hand. If we go inside of the penal state, we find that there's an opposition between the left hand, the defense attorneys, and the right hand, the prosecutor. And when we go into the offices of the prosecutors or the offices of public defenders, which are court-appointed attorneys, which defend the rights of indigent defendants who cannot afford an attorney, when we go into these 2 offices, we found that they are also organized along by an opposition between the left wing and the right wing. So we have these mirroring oppositions at multiple scales. So this is going to be a frustrating lecture because I have to shrink my argument dramatically. I have to avoid legal technicalities, and so I cannot show you the rich ethnographic material that I produced, but let me give it a try, and let me first tell you how the argument will unfold. And I don't remember my slides. Wrong direction. Steps in the demonstration. So first, I will situate the pretrial. So the pretrial prosecutor is the prosecutor who negotiates the deals. So he sits in a room and he sits face to face with the defense attorneys, and he pulls out a file and he looks at the file, and then he makes an offer. It's called the opening offer. And then there's a discussion to see whether the attorney who represents the defendant and the prosecutors can agree on a plea bargain. So the pre-trial prosecutor who negotiates plea agreement on the professional scene, I will first situate him. Second, I will set out the methodological and the empirical parameters of my study. Then I will draw up an analytical map of the judicial space comprising the two offices, and also a map of the offices themselves, of the prosecutor and the public defender. I will then take you into the trenches of negotiated justice in an effort to give texture and to give to plea bargaining and to capture its many stakes. I will characterize plea bargaining as a variant of relational contracting, in which the parties involved sustain repeated exchanges over time through minimal trust and informal norms of communication. Judicial negotiation will emerge as a technically complex, socially embedded, loosely regulated, and strikingly collective practice, swinging between reformation and retribution, Kant and Bentham, the two opposed poles organizing the practical philosophies of punishment. It is an engine, plea bargaining is an engine for what I will call judicial tagging. It's the first time I'm going to try this concept. I made it up as I was writing the paper, so we're going to see if it flies or if it crashes. So judicial tagging is the process whereby bodies out of place are brought back within the control of the state. And I will conclude by arguing that the prosecutor is the penal state incarnate, and that to wield his full power, he must enroll the antagonistic cooperation not only of the defense attorneys, but of the defendant himself. And so I will argue that the prosecutor, together with the public defender, the court-appointed attorney, together with the defendant, the three of them appear as creatures of the penal state. So situating the pretrial prosecutors. Criminal courts, which lie at the core of the penal apparatus, are organized differently in different countries, though there's been a slow drift in recent decades towards the global alignment as manifested by the international diffusion of variants of plea bargaining borrowed from the United States. In Germany, I think it's Verständigung is the technical name for these agreements between the prosecutor and the defense attorney. In the United States, the main engine of criminal adjudication is the county or state criminal court, a local institution animated by a triad of legal professionals which processes about 18 million cases each year. The triad is composed of first prosecutors, housed by the district attorney's office, called DAs, so when I'll say a DA, you'll hear a prosecutor, who initiate action and charge cases and drive plea negotiations and prefigure sentence by suggesting to the judge what the sentence should be. Second, we have public defenders, court-appointed lawyers, generally employed by a public defender office called PDs, entrusted with protecting the constitutional rights of indigent defendants and accounting for some 70% of all cases are handled by the PDs. And the judges, who are nominated by the governor or elected to the bench by the citizenry, the judges arbitrate the courtroom relations between prosecutors and defenders, and they move the bureaucratic wheels of case adjudication. In large urban counties, these entities in turn are complex legal bureaucratic machinery with differentiated units and distribution of personnel, of tasks or budgets, varying with county population, with the policy priorities and the local profile of criminality and the culture of punishment of counties. There are 3,200 counties in the United States, and there's 2,300 offices of prosecutors, each with their own policy, each with their own rule, no coordination, no agency has an overall capacity to orient these 2,300 different offices. And if there is one thing that characterizes them, it's their insularity. They are little fiefdoms or little islands unto themselves. The DA's office in the main county featured in the present lecture runs on a yearly budget of $50 million and employs 130 line prosecutors or deputy DAs who handle 28,000 cases, including 7,000 felonies in a typical year. A felony is a case that is liable to 1 year or more of prison. A misdemeanor is a lesser offense that is typically handled with fines or a maximum of 1 year of jail. So in California, as I mentioned, as in other states, 97% of felony cases are resolved by plea bargaining. This means that a central pivot in the division of judicial labor and triage point of felony cases in the county criminal court is occupied by the pretrial prosecutor who negotiates these cases. Now, the judicial process in California, as in other states, is pretty complicated. I'm going to present a simplified diagram. This is the simplified diagram. So, but for our purposes, we're going to simplify this diagram further and try to understand 3 steps. This is, so the first step is arrest and booking at the jail. Then a prosecutor charges the case. An arraignment is a hearing where the defendant is presented to a judge and the judge reads the charges against the person and asks them if they have an attorney. And if they can't pay for an attorney, then the case is assigned to a public defender. And after the arraignment, the typical indigent defendant will be taken back to the jail because he cannot pay bail to be released, or because the crime is serious enough that the judge considers that there's a threat to public safety, or that the defendant is likely not to come back to court. And then enters this period of pretrial negotiations. Pretrial negotiation is a period of several weeks or months during which periodically the pretrial attorney will meet in the pretrial negotiation room with the public defender and try to negotiate and to resolve the case before it is set for trial. But before the trial, there's a step called preliminary hearing, called PX. This is very funny to talk about PX in Germany. It's, I've never lectured on this material, so it's the first time I utter the word PX. So to do so in Frankfurt is kind of surreal. But so the PX is a hearing lasting from 2 hours to a day, during which the prosecutor must present enough evidence to the judge for the judge to decide that the case should go to trial. And then the case is set for trial. But even when the case is set to trial, there will continue to be negotiations to try to resolve the case by a plea bargain. So the DA, the pretrial DA, will make opening offer of a guilty plea to defendants via their defense attorneys and try to close deals prior to the assignment of case to pretrial, PX, and then to trial. The job of the pretrial DA also entails coordinating with the work of the team of prosecutors who are tasked with preparing these preliminary examinations for these same cases in the event that plea negotiations prove fruitless. In San Pedrito County, the fake name of the county that I studied, and I will not reveal to you why I gave this name, but it has tremendous meaning for me when I say this. This will remain a mystery to this audience. All pretrial felony pleas are centralized in the hands of only 2 deputy DAs, one each for the western and the eastern part of the county. This guarantees consistency across cases, since it's the same DA negotiating, in each region, but it comes with notable differences across individuals and across regions. Different prosecutors differ to some degree in how they assess cases. Some are particularly intolerant of certain offenses, for instance, the sale of narcotics or mass identity theft, and thus make comparatively high offer. A high offer is an offer with a lot of punishment. A low offer is an offer very, very lenient, both in terms of the charges and in terms of the sentences proposed. So the defense attorneys want the pretrial DA to lower their offer. And thus make comparatively high offer on them. Some DAs refuse to make offers on certain cases, such as brutal homicides or child sexual assault, whereas some pretrial DA bend over backward to offer felony probation, meaning suspended sentences, to meritorious defendants. So what are the traits of the pretrial prosecutor? 5 key characteristics of the pretrial assignment. The pretrial DA must be a seasoned attorney with extensive and recent trial experience. He must know the quantum of punishment that judges will consistently impose after conviction for the different categories of crimes so that he can evaluate what is called the worth of a case from the end point of the prosecution chain. The worth of a case is a central folk category of judicial work in the criminal court. It is constantly invoked and haggled over by prosecutors and defense attorneys. It is an evolving estimate of the fitting quantum of punishment that anchors negotiation based on offense, offender's age and record, circumstances and impact of the crime, the provability and the current going rate set against the operational resources of the court. It is the central stake of the negotiations. The pretrial DA must also be reasonable. So what do people mean when they say reasonable in the county court? They mean that an attorney who can entertain discussion, who will make offers within the accepted range, and who will be, third characteristic, a straight shooter. A straight shooter means an attorney who is forthcoming, who is measured, and who is trustworthy. Fourth, it is an honor to be appointed, to be charged with, for prosecutors to be assigned to the position of pretrial negotiator, a mark of professional expertise, and a vote of personal confidence from the chief DA who runs the office, and it generally signals a climb up the occupational hierarchy. For younger prosecutors to be assigned to the pretrial position, it marks them out as a rising star in the office, one who may one day become part of management. It comes with a small increase in salary, but a great increase in prestige. But it also is a burden. The volume of work is crushing, the pace of labor torrid, and the complexity of the work daunting. The pretrial DA must be prepared to put in long days of work, a good 10 hours, and come into the office all day on Saturday or Sunday to pore over paper files, listen to audio recordings, and view video evidence of criminal activity to craft his offers. He must deal face-to-face with a constant stream of defense attorneys, public and private, who can be difficult to get along with. Some seasoned prosecutors would rather be spared the honor of being assigned to the pretrial position, especially the attorneys called trial dogs. The trial dogs are those attorneys, prosecutors, who relish taking serious cases to trial. Now let's move on to the parameters of the study. The professors come to court. This lecture is based on an ethnographic study carried out in 30 months, stretched over a 3-year period, during which I embedded myself into 2 county criminal courts of Northern California. I obtained exceptional access as a result of a long and patient work of diplomacy that would deserve its own book. After I had obtained the trust and shown my minimal competency, I was affectionately nicknamed by the attorneys the professor. So the professor studied 5 courthouses in 2 counties and wrote his field notes very studiously every day, amounting to 2,300 pages of field notes. And then I set up camp in judges' private chambers to get to know the different attorneys and for them to get used to my presence among them. Then I carried out 100 formal interviews with prosecutors, covering their childhood, their high school years, their law school years, their professional trajectory, activities and aspirations, and their sense of justice. I carried out 100 interviews with public defenders on the same topics, 22 interviews with private defense attorneys, with 22 private attorneys, but some attorneys I interviewed up to 10 times. And 15 judges, and then I shadowed prosecutors, judges, and private defense attorneys in their daily round, and I observed 37 sessions of plea negotiation, lasting either 2 hours or 3 hours. I had to wear a uniform, which is suit and tie, and I had to buy a cheap suit for the first time in my life. And I had to learn how to put a tie on, how to tie a tie on a YouTube tutorial. So during these plea bargaining sessions, I was allowed to sit near the edge of the negotiating table and to scrutinize the interactions between attorneys, take handwritten notes in a small pocket book. So you see here, you see my pocket book on which this is my clock to time myself, to time the exchanges between the attorneys. This is my field notebook, and this is my tape recorder on my other leg. So take handwritten notes in a pocketbook notebook sitting on one thigh, and record conversation with a small digital voice recorder sitting on my other thigh. Altogether, I recorded over 100 hours of plea negotiations. The full transcript of a typical pretrial negotiation session runs about 50 to 70 pages for a total in excess of 2,000 pages of printed text. So now you know why I needed a sabbatical to jump into this data and analyze it. In this lecture, I will limit myself to only one of the three pretrial prosecutors whom I observed at work. I'm going to now take you into the anatomy of the local judicial field. To understand the professional conduct of court attorneys and their strategic interactions with one another, as with judges, it is indispensable to first locate them on a map, charting their locations and their possible peregrinations. Now, deploying the topological mode of reasoning, one can construct the local judicial field, in Bourdieu's sense of the term, defined as the structure of objective positions occupied by the court protagonists in their everyday struggle to impose their definition of justice and thus to shape the process and the output of the courthouse. As a first approximation, we may represent the judicial triad formed by the prosecutor, the defender, public or private, and the judge as a triangle with an opposition between the DA and the PD forming the base and the judge situated at the summit. The prosecutor occupies the dominant pole of the local judicial field because he initiates action, drives the proceedings, and enjoys considerable discretion and leverage in the use of state authority. He is located on the right, politically, semantically, and metaphorically, on the public side of the law, which he is entrusted with enforcing. He incarnates the right hand of the state, the masculine and the paternal hand of discipline and castigation, delivered in the name of deserving citizens, incarnated by the victim, and in the name of the public good. He is the guarantor of social and moral order. The defender, public or private defense attorney, occupies the dominated pole of the local judicial field. She stands on the left, politically, semantically, and metaphorically, on the private side of the alleged violator of the law, whom she shields from the wrath of the state. She incarnates the left hand of the state, the feminine and maternal hand, that protects and nurtures categories deprived of capital and suspected of being undeserving by virtue of their errant conduct. The public, as well as the private defender, reacts to the initiative of the prosecutor and the pronouncements of the judge. She suffers from her absence of independent authority. Now, the judge occupies a seemingly neutral and overhanging position, but he is clearly leaning towards the right, the side of social and public order. This is because the judge is entrusted with seeing that this very order is properly restored. He shares many positional properties with the prosecutor. Both are agents who act in the name and for the benefit of the citizenry at large. Both are endowed with aura insofar as they are delegated by the state to act in its name. So now we can complicate that diagram, and you can see the left hand and the right hand. Now you can understand the mysterious left hand and right hand of the state. Lecture 1 you wrap up all the lectures together. And so you can see that the triangle is a scalene triangle. It's not an isosceles. It doesn't have the distance between the different points are not equal. The distance between the judge and the prosecutor is shorter than the distance between the judge and the defender, because of the structural complicity of the judge and the prosecutor. So the defense attorney stands on the side of the profane. Their mission is to thwart the action of the DA, who represents the people. The defense attorney acts not in the name of a sanctified collective, but a singular individual who has allegedly desecrated that whole by their conduct. The very expression of client, so the public defender or the private defense attorney, they have a client. The very expression of client suggests a venal and private relationship. Defenders protect agents of disorders and are for this reason themselves suspected of fomenting disorder. The defenders stand in a relationship of submissive diffidence with the judge, whom they approach as supplicants, and a relationship of collusive antagonism with the DA. Antagonism because in an adversarial system, the task of the defender is to derail the strategies and blunt the authority of the prosecutor. But it is collusive because for reasons of volume and process, the defender must collaborate with the prosecutor to resolve cases in the interest of their client. Now, the mission of the public defender is enshrouded in stigma due to the lowly character and deviant behavior of the population she serves. Her profession is disgraced even in the eyes of her client. Like typically, the defendant believes that they call their public defenders public pretenders. They call them public dumpsters. They believe that they are not attorneys. They believe that because the service is provided to them for free, it is worthless. They believe also that the PDs are in cahoots, are allies of the prosecutors. Some even believe that the PDs have to send a certain number of defendants to prison, and then they will become DAs. So you can imagine that it's difficult for the PDs to work with a client who has all these crazy beliefs about what their mission is about. So the structural opposition between the disciplinary right hand and the protective left hand of the state that I elaborated in my first lecture is thus replicated within the local judicial field by the opposition between the prosecutor and the public defender, as well as within the spaces of prosecutor and public defenders by the opposition between the left wing and the right wing of each office. Consider the first antinomy between PD and DA. On the right, we have the prosecutor, who affirms the priority of the law and is inclined to give primacy to the legal text over the social context. The prosecutor is the agent of autonomy. Pushed to its extreme, his penal philosophy centers on the offense and tends structurally towards just desert or retribution, the retrospective delivery of punishment fitting the crime regardless of the profile of the offender. The prosecutor is the progenitor of Kantian penality. On the left, we have the public defender, who is in every way diametrically opposed. She wishes to broaden the purview, to project our client as a full social being, and she prioritizes social context over legal text. She is the agent of heteronomy, in that she brings extrajudicial consideration of work, family, and community into the judicial field. Her penal philosophy centers on the offender, and it is animated by a prospective commitment to rehabilitation. The public defender is the progenitor of Benthamite penalty. So I'm going to, let's see, so I'm going to skip that slide. Now consider, so this is the opposition between the two offices in the judicial triangle. So now we're going to go into each of the offices and consider the internal anatomy of each of the two offices. They can be, let me give you these propositions. First, I'm going to argue that the space of prosecutors and the space of public defenders are mirror images of each other. Second, I'm going to show that they are both polarized between a pole of autonomy and a pole of heteronomy. I'm going to argue that the right wing of the DA and the left wing of the PD are occupied by judges, by attorneys that are called the true believers, the hardcore prosecutors and the hardcore PDs. And then I'm going to argue that the left wing of the DA and the right wing of the PD overlap, constituting the meeting ground for the negotiators. This is probably too difficult right now to grasp, but you're going to see the diagram will now be crystal clear. So consider the internal anatomy of the two offices. They can both be represented by an oblong, organized around two opposed poles, aligned with the antinomy organizing the two poles of the local judicial field. The right of the DA's office and the left of the PD's office are the poles of autonomy in their respective spaces, represented by the plus sign. The left of the DA's office and the right of the PD's office are the poles of heteronomy, represented by the minus sign. The two oblongs overlap to form a Venn diagram.
You see, my technique. So you can see this overlap right there between. So this is the right of PD, the DA's office, the left of the DA's office, the left of the PD's office, the right of the PD's office, and here we have this superposition. At the two tail ends, we have the true believers, and in the middle, we have those who are the negotiators.
So remarkably, the lawyers occupying the autonomous pole in each of the two offices are both called true believers. The DA true believer trains his affection on the victim. The PD true believer loves every one of his clients. On the far right side, so the hardened prosecutors believe that every defendant is guilty and should pay the price on grounds of individual responsibility. On the far left-hand side, the hardened public defender hold that every client is innocent and deserves to, quote, walk. To walk meaning not being found not guilty. Because social conditions and circumstances explain even the most gruesome crimes in which culpability is beyond doubt. For them, it is society and not the individual client who is guilty. Accordingly, the aim of the public defender is to suppress or mitigate punishment by invoking social adversity. These two oblongs overlap, such that the left wing of the DA's office and the right wing of the PD's office intersect. At this intersection reside what may be called hybrid attorneys, who are two-sided. Prosecutors who are sensitive to the stance of the defense and could even have become public defenders themselves, and public defenders who acknowledge the righteous mission of the prosecutors and could have become prosecutors themselves, but for the accidents of personal, academic, and professional life. These two-sided attorneys are what I call the negotiators, who will help resolve cases smoothly because they are disposed to dialogue and they are endowed with empathy for the opposing party. So the space of prosecutor is traversed by a tension between the attorneys who prioritize the penal or reactive mission of the office and those who see value in its social and proactive purpose. The right-wingers relish the assignments that put them in position to fight serious crime. They are part of the gang unit. They volunteer for the sexual assault team. They are prepared to take to trial the toughest rape and murder cases. And the left-wingers of the DA's office set store by programs of diversion, crime prevention, and public education. They favored negotiation over litigation, and they have little taste for the high wire of trial. So the central proposition, made possible by combining Durkheim, Weber, and Bourdieu in these diagrams, remind us that justice is not an absolute, but it is the historical product of pattern struggles raging between the two offices as well as within the two offices. Struggles over the overarching philosophy and the day-to-day priorities of the prosecutor and the public defender. The diagram also tells us that the pre-trial prosecutor cannot be a true believer, or the machinery of plea bargaining will come to a screeching out. So this is the structural moment of analysis. Now let's get down to the ground. Let's get down in the trenches. Oh, I forgot this diagram.
You can see all the oppositions that I defined. So you can see the prosecutor. This is this is, remember, the right hand of the state. On the right hand of the state, we have the prosecutor, but inside the prosecutor's office, we have a battle between the negotiators and the true believers, and then this battle, and then we have a battle inside the PD's office between the true believers and the negotiators, and the battle number one between the public defenders and the prosecutors, and battle number two inside the different offices determine the tenor of justice in the criminal courts. So let's get down to the ground. The conventional ethnography of the court takes what I call the view from the gallery. It describes and analyzes criminal processing in open court, the visible exchanges between the judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, defendant, clerks, bailiffs. But this behavior is a bureaucratic routine and ceremonial. It is kabuki theater. The real court work is carried out in the wings, in the offices of the DA and the PD, where attorneys prepare cases, in the judges' private chambers, in the witness rooms, and in the corridors when deals are discussed and struck. So instead of taking the view from the courtroom, so here you can see this is a typical courtroom with the American flag, of course, and we are in the gallery, so this is the view from the gallery. This portion of the courtroom is called the well, and this is a view from, this is me sitting here with my little notebook, and I'm sitting inside the well of the courtroom. And this is the position that I use. During arraignment, the defendant will be brought from the door that is here in this glass cage, and the judge who is sitting on this elevated bench will read the charges to the defendant, tell them what the charges against them are, ask them if they have an attorney, and assign them to the PD's office. So we're not going to take, as you can imagine, if I spent 3.5 years in the court, it wasn't to take the view from the gallery. We're going to take the view from the wings. So the view from backstage. Court work is carried out, in our case, in the pretrial room. This is the pretrial room. Located inside the DA's office, accessible only to staff of the DAs and prosecutors and to the defense attorneys who have cases to negotiate. So you see that little room, and now let us follow one of the pretrial DA that I will call Julius. Julius is a 12-year veteran of the office who is in charge of the pretrial negotiations. Every morning at 9 a.m. sharp, he rolls through the back door of the 10 by 4 meter windowless room that serves as pretrial negotiation chamber, pushing a cart packed with some 50 blue folders containing the cases to be discussed that morning. He sits on a swivel chair behind a wooden T-shaped desk. Then 3 to 6 attorneys sit in the room before him or stand in the door frame, and they will take turns sitting opposite Julius to discuss their cases. A plea bargaining session with Julius is a fast-flowing 2-hour mix of technical talk, legal argumentation, social conversation, court news, professional rumor, and light banter. It mingles the routine and the shocking, the banal and the stunning, the hilarious and the tragic, the droning and the jaw-dropping, and everything in between. A veteran private attorney puts it this way. He says, "I've done criminal defense for 22 years. Every day is something new. Every day is like, oh my Lord." Another expression that attorneys use often to describe their work, they say, "You couldn't invent this stuff." The tenor and the tone of negotiation depends largely on the individual personality and the occupational persona of the pretrial prosecutor who sets the parameters of the ongoing barter. But haggling is a two-way street. The DA must also get to know and accommodate the skills, the style, the temperament of the public defenders and private attorneys who fill the room and take turns on the chair facing his desk. Moreover, the idioculture of the county criminal court favors negotiation over litigation. As a result, bargaining is stamped with professional cordiality, which helps strong disagreements in check and diffuse episodic tension. The exchanges are swift, making references to multiple strands of conversation couched in technical legal language.
They make reference to past exchanges about the current or earlier cases. They make reference to future possibilities should the case not resolve through plea bargaining. So, for instance, put over the case to another pretrial hearing 3 weeks down the line, or set the case for preliminary examination 2 or 3 weeks down the line. There is no particular order in which the cases are discussed. The rule is first come, first serve. There is also no set duration for discussing a case. Some take a couple of minutes. For instance, in the case of confirmation is given that the case will go to preliminary examination. Other cases take 5 minutes, up to 10 minutes more rarely. When they haggled over their offer, after they have haggled over their offer, the defense attorneys leave the pretrial room. They go back in the secure part of the courtroom to discuss the offer with their clients in a holding cell. There is thus a constant Brownian movement of bodies in and out of the room and multiple conversations going on at the same time. For instance, in the 8th session I observed, it involved 22 people, among them 6 prosecutors, 1 staff person, 2 receptionists, 6 public defenders, and 6 private defense attorneys. The offers are made verbally, no written documents are exchanged. Surprisingly, this rarely leads to miscommunication. This is because attorneys are vigilant and they are incited to be honest by the tight social and symbolic mesh of the court. Their professional reputation depends on it, and reputation is their most precious asset. Attorneys are on the honor system. Now, Julius keeps track of the negotiations by handwriting notes on the inside flap cover of the case folder. His modus operandi is to ask the defense attorney sitting opposite him what resolution they propose to the case, to voice where he stands, and then the two dig into the specifics of their disagreements. Among Julius's stock phrases are, he'll say, "Tell me what you want. Tell me what you're thinking of. Let me think about it." Julius then briefly explains his reasoning on the case, while defense attorneys cycle through a litany of reasons why he should lower his offer, as one reason after another gets pushed aside. An effective defense attorney is one who properly weighs the worth of a case, who has a resolution in mind, and even better, has a resolution that he has discussed with his client and that his client has agreed to. Now, the span of gravity of the cases negotiated is vertiginous. Some matter are trifling, as banal as selling marijuana and stealing a car, and they will routinely be, quote, busted down, that is, downgraded to the level of a misdemeanor with or without time behind bars. Other cases are life-turning, life-overturning for the defendant as well as for the victim, such as carjacking, child sexual assault, rape, or homicide, for which punishment is measured in dozens of years of prison and more. When these cases are discussed, the banter stops, the room becomes quiet, the mood turns somber, and Julius reclaims the helm of the negotiation. The pretrial DA has considerable latitude to craft his offers, playing with the charges, with the recommended sentences, and with the facts that the defendant will plead to. He can revise his offer up or down based on the information and evidence dug up by the DAs from the preliminary examination team to whom the case has been assigned, as the matter slowly winds its way from one pretrial hearing to the next. The pretrial DA can use his broad discretion to the detriment or to the benefit of the defendant, something that Julius does often in cases involving young offenders with no criminal record. Age is the single most impactful variable at this stage of adjudication, with 21 years of age as the cutoff point in which you're considered old. In addition to adjusting charges, Julius has a whole menu of items to check on or off, called enhancements and strikes, that allow him to vary punishment from minimal misdemeanor probation with no custody time to extreme life in prison without the possibility of parole, depending on the specifics of the case. So now let us look at the discretion of the pretrial prosecutor. To say that the pretrial prosecutor has discretion does not mean that he can invoke these elements at will and on a whim. The conventional literature on prosecutors complain that their discretion is, quote, absolute and unreviewable. But close-up observation, the existing literature on prosecutors is also written by legal scholars who generally have never seen a plea bargaining live. Some of them have never even bothered to go down to the county criminal court. Some of them don't even know where the county criminal court is. So you can imagine their shock when you have a description of an actual plea bargaining session. So the conventional literature on prosecutors complains about their discretion is absolute and unreviewable. But close-up observation reveals that this is not the case. The prosecutor is embedded in a series of nested webs of social ties and symbolic frames that extend well beyond the courtroom work group and transmute absolute discretion into what we could call bound discretion. And here I'm making a reference to the distinction that Herbert Simon, the economist, made between perfect rationality and bounded rationality. The constraining factors that shape the prosecutor's evaluation on any given case take the form of a series of concentric circles of a magnetic force that limit his prerogatives. These include first his habitus, his visceral moral values, which lead him to perceive and evaluate facts in a certain light, the penal algorithm he uses to compute what is known as exposure, and I'm going to get there in a minute, the going rate for similar cases in the region of his county, the pushback from the defense bar, especially public defenders via their office, his membership in a team and his relationship to his supervisors, office culture and policy, the sentencing judge who must validate the plea agreement and can reject it, the courthouse tradition and the county criminal politics, and finally, of course, legal statutes. So capturing the conduct, the reasoning, and the emotions of the pretrial prosecutor at ground level based on the close-up observation of routine activities in his ordinary setting instantly deconstructs the monolithic portrait of the penal state, including my own portrait of the penal state. Let us consider briefly 5 of the 11 elements of plea bargaining that I discuss in the longer version of this lecture. First, the first dilemma that Julius must resolve is the sheer volume of files he has to process and the knowledge asymmetry he must contend with. On any one morning, the attorneys he faces negotiate a single case each for most private defense attorneys, or a handful of cases, typically 4 to 7 cases for public defenders. Cases that the defense attorneys have had the time to prepare in depth on the preceding days earlier that morning. By contrast, Julius must devote most of his time to reading new cases and keep at his command the facts concerning 3 to 5 dozen cases that morning, old and new, and not just in broad outline, because the devil is in the detail. If he is not unprepared, Julius will get rolled by the defense attorneys who will rule the roost. So first dilemma. Second, all the attorneys present in the room or standing in the entrance corridor, typically numbering 3 to 7, can hear the details of the cases that are verbalized, as well as follow the run of bargaining between Julius and the defender facing him at the desk. This infringement on confidentiality might seem surprising, but it serves an important pedagogical function. It educates the defense attorneys on the legal standards, mode of thinking, and style of negotiation of Julius. They can sample his demeanor, they can hear him chortle at the offenses that are his pet peeves. They find out that he has little patience for the usual sob stories concocted by defense attorneys. More crucially, they learn what he expects them to do to agree to lower an offer. In this particular case, prepare what is called a mitigation package, providing evidence that the defendant has a job, goes to school, is checked into a program related to his offense, for instance, a residential facility for alcohol or drug treatment, or is otherwise meritorious. In short, by observing the other negotiations as they unfold, defense attorneys learn salient facts of Julius's prosecutorial habitus, the categories of legal perception and moral judgment that guide his work, and they can thus anticipate how best to engage Julius when it comes to their turn. Thirdly, the pretrial prosecutor sets the price of crime. With his plea offers, the pretrial DA effectively sets the price of crime for the territory under his authority. The price of crime, also known as the going rate, is the customary quantum of punishment attached to each offense category for a generic offender absent case specifics. For instance, in this particular county, being illegally in possession of a firearm guaranteed you a sentence of 180 days of jail. That was the going rate for, or a second robbery or 5-year felony probation for a first residential burglary. This price is a local value which varies with geography. Courthouses in the same cities, in the same county, will price a given offense category differently. The variation across counties is even more pronounced. The greatest unwarranted disparity in criminal adjudication is not race, which has obsessed American scholars of punishment, but place. The price of crime is not the spawn of the whimsical wish or personal taste of the pretrial attorney. It is the dynamic product of court precedent, office policy, the volume of cases, the balance of power between the offices and the DA, of the DA and the PD, and the sentencing scale of the judges. The individual pretrial DA can inflect this price, but he cannot change it drastically by going against the weight of collective expectations as defined not just in the county, but in each individual courthouse in different localities. So now let's get to what is known, what I call the prosecutorial algorithm. There is one more source of consistency and predictability which reduces the discretion of the pretrial attorney, is the following. Pretrial prosecutors commonly use an informal penal algorithm to peg their initial plea offers. A common formula is first to decide whether the case is a probation case on which you could give a suspended prison sentence, or whether it's a prison case. And if it is a prison case, compute what is known as total exposure. That is, the summed up maximum numbers of years of prison incurred if the defendant were found guilty on all counts. And then you take that maximum exposure and you divide that number by 3, or by 2 in the case of violent offenses, and that gives you the offer that you will make on the case. Then the offer can be adjusted by adding or subtracting a year or 2 of prison, depending on the age and record of the defendant, the circumstances of the crime, the attitude of the victim, and problems in proving the case. This algorithm is tantamount to a self-imposed limit on latitude. Defense attorneys know it is in play, and they will invoke it in their bargaining argumentation, calling out the prosecutor if she hands out an offer that is out of line with the penal algorithm. Next, we have the terms. Yeah, we have the penal algorithm, the prosecutorial algorithm. So does that make sense? The prosecutor computes, he gets a case, he looks at the charges. Each charge has a triad attached to it in California, meaning 3 possible sanctions for the same felony, a mid-term, a high term, and a low term. The mid-term is the normal term, the high term is if there are aggravating circumstances, the suggestion will be to take the high term, and if there are mitigating circumstances, the suggested punishment will be the low term. For instance, for a robbery, the triad is 2, 4, 6. And so then you take all of the charges, you look at how many years of prisons each is liable to, and then you add all these years of prison, and the total years of prison, that's your exposure. And then you divide that exposure by 3, and that's the opening offer. But there are many other elements enter into plea bargaining. The legal and social science literature on plea bargaining generally limits its purview to two outcomes, charge and sentence, with the latter measures in years of prisons. This is a woefully incomplete picture of the span, stakes, and paths of negotiation, and it misses the vast majority of felony cases which are processed by the criminal court, because most cases lead to probation, suspended sentences, and not years of prisons. In San Pedrito County, the prosecutor and the defense attorney routinely haggle over 8 elements. The charge, the DA can drop or add charges, lower counts, or lower charges by replacing them by one or another lesser included offense. The sentence, the prosecutor can agree to and recommend a sentence by choosing the low term of the sentencing triad. Sentence enhancements, the law stipulates a number of factors that automatically increase punishment by adding years to the base sentence. So for instance, committing a crime with the use of a firearm, or committing a crime in the course of gang activity, or committing a crime that produces what is known as GBI, great bodily injury. And if you have any one of these 3 enhancements, then you get added years of prison. Also, the site of execution of custodial sentence is negotiated, because the convict may be allowed to serve his time locally in county jail as opposed to far away in state prison. The terms of probation will also be discussed. The most common sentence for run-of-the-mill felonies is not prison time, but probation. So the parameters of probation supervision loom large in the negotiations. These include whether probation is formal or informal, the duration of supervision from 1 to 5 years, the search and seizure clauses. So search and seizure clauses are stipulations that the person on probation can be searched. So a search clause, so there is something called the 4-way search clause. And the four-way search clause stipulates that the police can arrest you without any reason and can search your person, your belongings, your car, and your residence. And so this, of course, is to be negotiated, and you can imagine it's very constraining to have a 4-way search clause while being on probation for up to 5 years. They can also negotiate curfews, stay-away orders, stipulations such as drug and alcohol testing, the obligation to follow court-mandated programs, and other obligations such as classes in anger management, or obtaining a high school degree, or drug counseling. You can also negotiate the time of release. The defendant may be allowed to walk out of jail immediately upon the entry of the plea, or have to wait in custody until the sentencing hearing 1 or 2 months down the road. And lastly, up for negotiation are some of the fines and fees attached to the criminal conviction. Lastly, the DA will play a game of cat and mouse with the sentencing judge. A key filter extraneous to the negotiating pair of the prosecutor and the defense attorneys is manned by the sentencing judge, who must review and approve all plea agreements and is one to cast out deals falling outside of the norm of the court and even of the particular courthouse where he officiates. The judge has the latitude to reject plea agreements, thus sending the case back to the pretrial prosecutor, for whom this rejection is a black mark. The judge can also decide not to follow the sentencing recommendation of the DA, although he will do so in the vast majority of cases under the pragmatic presumption that the prosecutor and the defense attorney who negotiated the case know the case best and found the most sensible resolution. So the pretrial DA, as he crafts his offer, he must anticipate the expectations of the sentencing judge and factor them into his offers, which reduces his own latitude. Indeed, he will tell public defenders that the reasons why he cannot give such and such lenient deal is that he knows that the sentencing judge will throw that deal back in his face. Occasionally, the prosecutor will conspire with a veteran defense attorney that he holds in high regard in crafting an offer that both of them will hope will sail by the judge unnoticed. Now we get to the point of, once we have negotiated all this, we get to what I call judicial tagging. Plea bargaining stands at the epicenter of court work, the social and legal labor collectively expended to transform judicial input into output, a body out of place into a body tagged and brought under control of the state. Judicial tagging is a graduated process and a collective activity carried out by way of plea negotiation. It consists in the disputed assignation of the defendant to a penal category comprising the crime and the attendant punishment recognized by the court and its agents, the transmutation of a human being in all of his biographical idiosyncrasy and social complexity into a simplified legal designation recorded by the prosecutorial script of the plea, which you have
on the board. So this is read, so O means this is the offer to plead guilty to a violation of Vehicle Code section 28.8.2a, reckless evading of a police officer while driving. And then the offer is for 5 FP, 5 years felony probation. No, so NPSP is no physical state prison. 4X is the four-way search clause, and RFF is restitution to the California Department of Justice. And then 296 is Penal Code section 296, is you have to provide a DNA sample
to the state of California Corrections Department. Plea bargaining consists in people tagging, designed to facilitate people processing by the penal machinery. The tag is a juridical fiction in the etymological sense of fabrication, in the bureaucratic sense that it always misrepresents the nature and the severity of the conduct. Let me give you some more examples of, and this is Julius crafting his plea offers during the lunch break. He doesn't take a break, he eats a fruit, and he reads cases and crafts his offers during the lunch break. So it's a fiction, but a fiction with consequences, since it determines the further journey of the defendant turned convict through the maze of the penal apparatus. Once a defendant is tagged in the give and take of plea negotiation, he literally disappears behind his tag. The tag simplifies and signifies penal reality by translating verdicts about conduct and person into legal and bureaucratic constructs for the sake of court processing. It is fashioned for internal consumption, and it will follow the defendant for the rest of his court life. People tagging is graduated, contested, and ongoing activity. In the manner of a graffito, the tag is scrawled, partly effaced, possibly modified from hearing to hearing at the pretrial stage until the plea offer is accepted and entered into the record. So this, in the case of these 3 examples, these were offers that Julius had made that had not yet been agreed to. So when he will discuss the case with the public defender or with the private defense attorneys, then they may change the nature, they may change the charge that the person pleads to. They may change but so, for instance, here this is 2 years of state prison. They may change the sentence that is recommended, or they may change the conditions of probation. But once the final deal is made, it is entered into the record, and the tag is eternal. Judicial bargaining, then, is best understood not through the metaphor of the marketplace commonly used by legal scholars, where supply meets demand punctually, but with the concept of relational contracting, coined by a half-century ago by the legal scholar Jan McNeill. Relational contracting characterizes a sequence of exchanges sustained by an ongoing social relationship premised on mutual trust and tacit norms that compensate for the lack of a formal contract. The present transaction is crucially informed by the traces of past exchanges and by the expectation of future exchanges between the same parties. This describes well the social organization and the temporal tenor of the interactions between the pretrial attorney in the pretrial room. Consider that the same public defender comes every week on the same weekday to negotiate her batch of cases with Julius. This means that over a year's time, Julius and that attorney will have faced each other some 50 times and negotiated in the order of 250 cases. Moreover, they will have done so in an enclosed physical space with its idioculture, where other repeat actors will have witnessed their exchanges and sometimes intervened in them. No wonder that prosecutors and defense counsel evolve minimal reliance and collaborative relationships based on informal norms to keep the wheels of bargaining going despite the adversarial framework within which they formally operate. In these repeated exchanges, the two attorneys gain a sense of each other's judicial personality, personal temperament, and moral proclivities. They gain the capacity to anticipate and smoothly adjust to the peculiarities of the other's rhetorical tactics and negotiation strategies. They can, in other words, engages in antagonistic cooperation and reap its dual benefits. For the prosecutor, a definite resolution and practical disposal of the case. For the defense attorneys, a discount on current punishment and its future consequences for her clients. And then the relationship can be extended into the future. The prosecutor and the public defender thus act as two agents of the state, the one to deliver punishment and the other to restrain it. And their structural complicity is inscribed in the position that they occupy in the local judicial field and makes it possible for the state to regain dispatching control over bodies out of place. So here, structural position matters. The relationship between prosecutors and public defenders take on a different tone and tenor depending on their location in the social architecture of their respective office. The exchanges between negotiators occupying the left wing of the DA's office and the right wing of the PD's office are smooth and fruitful, while transactions involving true believers on either side tend to be fractious and even acrimonious. So now let me come to the conclusion of this lecture, in which I want to argue that the prosecutor that we have seen at work who runs plea bargaining is the human spear of the state. He is the penal state incarnate. He is the judicial leviathan in action. Out of the daily tussle with the bar and bench, he effectively rewrites criminal law at ground level and pinpoints the delivery of properly authorized material and symbolic violence. Now, pay attention to the terms of this carefully worded proposition. My argument here is emphatically not that the power of the prosecutor is, quote, unlimited, excessive, or arbitrary, as commonly argued by legal analysts and social critics of the American justice apparatus. Nor is it that the guilty plea is an adulteration of judicial equity. On the contrary, the close-up analysis of plea negotiation sessions as they unfold at ground level demonstrates that the power of the prosecutor is finely calibrated, socially bounded, and impeccably legitimate. So the power of the DA is first not unlimited, but calibrated. Malcolm Feeley, who authored a classic study of low-level courts called The Process is the Punishment, published in 1979, writes, "A court is not an assembly line, and court officials are not automatons, mindlessly stamping out endless copies of the same product. Punishment is painstakingly adjusted to the specifics of cases, tailored to the fact at hand, angled by policy directives and inflected by the tenor of the extended mesh of social exchanges between the pretrial prosecutor and the defense bar and judge. Excessive would presume some normal quantum of power, but set by what or whom? The cases that are resolved through negotiation never match the maximum allowed by the law and even the medium stipulated by criminal statutes. If there is excess, then it is the excess promulgated by the legislator who writes the criminal code, not spawned by prosecutors. And the problem is distinctly political and not judicial. Second argument, the power of the DA is not absolute, but bounded. The prosecutor is deeply embedded in a series of nested social spaces that shape her cognition, inform her emotions, and circumvent her conduct, starting with her team, her supervisors, her workmates, continuing with defense attorneys and judges, and closing with courthouse tradition and the politics of crime in the county. Her discretion is real but circumscribed. Her power is considerable but nonetheless constrained. Her substantive sense of justice is pertinent, but it is shared and checked. For the line DA is not a lonesome cowboy riding the horse of his individual taste and impulse, but an intensely social animal actualizing the possibilities of structural position in a professional and judicial space that both contains and explains a strategic action. She has a courthouse and an office reputation which took her years to build and which can be lost in a day if she misuses her judicial power. Thirdly, the power of the prosecutor is legitimate. The DA is dressed in the garb of the Leviathan, and so long as he follows his oath and grants the defendant minimal due process, his action is unimpeachable. Formal rationality in the Weberian sense is his impersonal justification. Here, the defense attorney plays a key role in partnering with the prosecutor to roll out the ceremonial of equity. The public defender is especially pivotal because the public defender is employed, paid, and tasked by the state to limit the wrath of the state towards indigent citizens, wayward creatures of the dreaded underbelly of the city. The public defender is the state turning against the state, the penal state again in action. Lastly, most surprisingly, the defendant acts as a delegate of the penal state. The legitimacy of the prosecutorial power is reinforced and validated by the judicial deportment and deeds of the defendant in court. In the US system of justice, the defendant is first rendered mute. Pursuant to the rules of criminal procedure in an adversarial system, the defendant is spoken by his attorney. He never has any verbal exchange with the prosecutors and only faint communication with the judges when he utters yes or no, or better, yes, your honor, when he is asked about the different stipulations of the guilty plea, thereby acknowledging that the judge is deputized by the state as the fount of honor. In the daily work of the court, the defendant is also virtually unseen and unheard of. He is held away in jail or kept in a holding pen in a secure area of the courthouse, only to make a brief and formalistic appearance in the courtroom. His fate is decided in confabulations happening in the corridors, the witness rooms, the judges' chambers, not in the bureaucratic ceremonial of open court during which he is present. While the defendant ultimately decides to accept or reject the plea deal, he does not set its terms, and his choice is strictly circumscribed. His decision is moreover largely prefigured by the way the defense attorney frames the plea offer on the table. Like it or not, the defendant is simply not a player, but a prop in the legal dance, contrary to populist account who wish to generously endow the defendant with agency in the courthouse. The defendant is just a body out of place, whose most salient and consequential properties are age and class, not race. Except, and this is my second point, that the defendant is made into an agent of his own condemnation. By agreeing to a plea of guilty, regardless of whether he is factually guilty or not, he becomes a de facto delegate of the state. He is made to literally impose on himself a criminal sanction and to lock it in, since in most jurisdictions, by entering a guilty plea, he gives up his right to an appeal. This allows the penal apparatus to proclaim, with good reason, that rights are respected, proper procedure is followed, due process is implemented. Did the accused not wield the sword of justice himself? So, what is gained from this third lecture? By following the daily activities of the prosecutor, we discover how the penal state operates at ground level, and we breathe life into the theoretical abstractions necessary to articulate its functioning. We document the technical complexity and legal flexibility of prosecutorial work and the layers of social and symbolic structures that limit and channel judicial discretion. We discover that the public defender and the defendant himself, who oppose the prosecutor also act as agents of the penal state. Everywhere we look, we discover situated, knowing, skilled agents who are nonetheless creatures of the penal state. Now we come to the brief conclusion to the 3 lectures. In conclusion, I will first disappoint you. If you expect extended normative meditations or smart policy recommendations, there are dozens of articles and books making clever and pointed proposals to reform criminal justice on both sides of the Atlantic, and little need to add more. The social theory, history, and ethnography of the penal state converge to teach us that many of these reforms will have minimal effects so long as urban marginality continues to fester and to intersect with ethnicity in stigmatized neighborhoods of relegation. One last diagram, I promise. One last diagram helps us visualize this claim by charting the vicious cycle of unruly marginalization and reactive penalization. When the state lets precarity diffuse and urban dereliction brew, it feeds social, moral, and symbolic disorder, to which the state then responds by rolling out its penal apparatus to contain local trouble and assuage public concern. But the penalization of disruptive poverty in the city only aggravates destitution and disorder, thus further entrenching marginality, which festers again, and the causal sequence starts anew. So I will close with a theoretical pirouette by invoking what we could call the parable of Marx's hangman. In an article on the death penalty published in the New York Daily Tribune of 1853, Karl Marx writes, "Is there not a necessity for deeply reflecting upon an alteration of the system that breeds these crimes, instead of glorifying the hangman who executes a lot of criminals to make room only for the supply of new ones?" Marx's formulation suggests that the best criminal justice reform is to act upstream and stanch the flow of offenders entering the penal funnel. It recommends switching hands, so to speak, and strengthening the left hand of the state by building its organizational and ideological capacity to reduce social inequality and curb dispossession in the polarizing metropolis. Now, one last short paragraph. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit und Großzügigkeit. Es war mir eine Ehre und Freude, die 2024. Adorno-Vorlesungen zu halten.